The Galactic Culinary Council's annual meeting on Space Station Umami Prime was always a spectacle of pretentiousness, but this year promised to be especially insufferable. Ambassador Rick Bronson adjusted his bolo tie and surveyed the gleaming conference hall, where beings from across the galaxy had gathered to determine which species produced the finest cuisine. The winner would secure premium trade routes and the kind of cultural prestige that made other species grovel for dinner invitations. Rick had seen this dog and pony show before. The same three judges sat at their elevated crystalline podium like food gods passing judgment on mere mortals. Chef Glordnox, a pretentious crystalline being whose faceted body refracted light in ways that probably violated several physics laws, clinked melodiously as he sorted through his judging notes. His voice resonated like wind chimes in a hurricane when he spoke, which was often and always condescendingly. Beside him sat Taste Master Felix, a snobbish insectoid whose compound eyes could allegedly detect flavor molecules from 3-star systems away. His mandibles clicked with disapproval at practically everything, and his 6 arms were constantly gesturing in ways that suggested everyone else's culinary efforts were beneath his considerable standards. The third judge, food sage Thwampus, was a pompous gas creature who existed as a swirling cloud of purple vapor contained within a mobility suit. His wheezy voice emerged from speakers built into his containment unit, and he had the annoying habit of speaking in pretentious philosophical terms about the essence of flavor transcendence. Rick had been Earth's culinary ambassador for 3 years now, and in that time humanity had placed dead last in every single competition. Not second to last. Not even a respectable middle position. Dead. Last every time. The other species found human cuisine laughably primitive. While they were creating dishes from crystallized starlight and fermented quantum foam, humans were still, apparently, playing with fire like cavemen. Ah, Ambassador Bronson. Chef Glordnox's voice chimed as Rick approached the presentation area. We're so looking forward to your quaint Earth offerings this year. I do hope you've moved beyond that charming little salad you presented last time. The other judges tittered with what passed for laughter in their respective species. Rick smiled diplomatically, though internally he was calculating exactly how many ways he could barbecue a crystalline being. Probably not many, given the whole made-of-living crystal situation. Well, Glordnox, I've got something special planned this year, Rick drawled, his Texas accent thick as molasses. Why all might want to clear your schedules. This is going to take a while. Felix's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. How delightfully rustic. Are we to expect more of your species' obsession with applying thermal energy to organic matter? Oh, you could say that, Rick replied, patting the large, mysterious device he'd wheeled into the station earlier. It looked like a metallic barrel with various tubes and gauges attached. To the aliens, it probably appeared as primitive as a stone axe. Food sage Thwampus swirled thoughtfully in his containment suit. The human approach to nourishment lacks the sophisticated philosophical underpinnings that elevate mere sustenance to art. When will your species learn that true cuisine transcends the physical realm? Rick nodded politely while mentally adding another item to his list of things he'd like to smoke low and slow. You know, Thwampus, you might be right about transcending the physical realm. We'll see about that. The competition began with the usual parade of incomprehensible alien delicacies. Chef Glordnox presented his signature dish, crystallized light beams infused with the emotional resonance of a dying star. It looked like someone had bedazzled a prism and charged it with existential dread. The judges proclaimed it transcendent and a symphony of photonic excellence. Taste Master Felix followed with his fermented methane spheres, which were exactly as appetizing as they sounded. They floated in mid-air like malevolent soap bubbles, occasionally popping to release clouds of gas that made even the ventilation system wheeze. The judges declared it boldly aromatic and an olfactory adventure that challenges conventional sensory boundaries. Food sage Thwampus went full pretentious with his compressed time essence, which appeared to be a shimmering cube that somehow contained the flavor of next Thursday. Rick wasn't entirely sure how that worked, but the judges ate it up, literally and figuratively, praising its temporal complexity and chronological depth. Then came Rick's turn. He approached the presentation area with a simple garden salad and a cooler containing what he described as the main course ingredients. The silence in the hall was deafening. Then Chef Glorbnox began to chime, a sound that gradually evolved into what Rick recognized as crystalline laughter. Soon Felix was clicking his mandibles in rapid-fire amusement, and Thwampus was swirling faster than a tornado in his containment suit. A salad, Glorbnox managed between chimes. The human presence, vegetation, raw vegetation. And what's in the cooling unit, Ambassador? Felix inquired, wiping compound eyes with 3 of his 6 arms. Rick opened the cooler to reveal several large cuts of beef brisket, pork ribs, and a whole pork shoulder. This here's going to be slow cooked over wood smoke for about 18 hours. The laughter intensified. Other alien species in the gallery joined in, their various forms of amusement creating a cacophony of sounds that probably violated several noise ordinances. But Rick Bronson hadn't always been a diplomat. Before taking this posting, he'd been Pitmaster Rick, 3-time champion of the Central Texas BBQ Championship. He'd given up competition to serve his species, but he'd never forgotten the sacred art of low and slow cooking. 18 hours? Thwampus wheezed. Surely you jest. Our molecular gastronomy techniques can create flavor profiles in mere milliseconds. Well now, Rick said, rolling up his sleeves, that's the difference between fast food and good food. It was then that Jenny Martinez stepped forward, wheeling in additional equipment. She'd been a food scientist before becoming Rick's assistant, and she understood the chemistry of flavor better than most aliens understood their own biology. Jenny, here's going to help me demonstrate something your species might not have encountered before, Rick announced. The ancient human art of patience. The judges exchanged glances that suggested they thought humans had finally lost whatever minimal grip on sanity they'd previously maintained. Fire-based cooking. Felix clicked dismissively. How wonderfully primitive. What's next, eating with your appendages? Rick smiled as he began seasoning the brisket with a dry rub blend he'd perfected over decades. You know, Felix, sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Sometimes simple is just better. The aliens had no idea what they were about to experience. Rick had come prepared for war, and his weapons were salt, pepper, smoke, and time. At 0600 station time, Rick fired up his smoker. The device, which the aliens had dismissed as primitive Earth technology, was actually a masterpiece of temperature control and airflow management. Rick had built it himself, incorporating lessons learned from 30 years of competitive barbecue. Jenny began her prep work with scientific precision, mixing injection marinades and preparing side dishes while explaining the process to increasingly curious alien observers. The Maillard reaction begins at approximately 280 degrees Fahrenheit, she explained to a small crowd of alien spectators who'd initially come to mock but were now genuinely intrigued by the complexity of the operation. That's when proteins and sugars begin breaking down to create new flavor compounds. Chef Glorbnox had drifted over, his crystalline form refracting the smoker's glow into prismatic rainbows. You're chemically altering the molecular structure of your protein matrices through controlled thermal application? In layman's terms, yeah, Rick drawled, adjusting dampers with the precision of a surgeon. But it ain't just heat. It's the wood smoke that does the real magic. Hickory, oak, apple, cherry, each one adds different flavor compounds. Aldehydes, phenols, carbonyls, all sorts of chemical goodness. The first wisps of smoke began curling from the smoker's chimney, carrying with them an aroma that had never before existed in the sterile environment of a space station. It was earthy, sweet, and complex in ways that molecular gastronomy could never replicate. Taste Master Felix's compound eyes began tracking the smoke patterns with hypnotic focus. That scent. What is that scent? That's the smell of meat taking on smoke, Rick explained, spritzing his brisket with apple cider vinegar. See, when you cook low and slow like this, you're not just heating the meat. You're transforming it. Breaking down tough connective tissues, allowing smoke to penetrate deep into the protein matrix, creating a bark on the outside that seals in moisture while adding texture contrast. Jenny held up a temperature probe. Will maintain internal smoker temperature between 225 and 250 degrees for the duration. The brisket won't be done until it reaches an internal temperature of 203 degrees, and even then, it needs to rest. Rest? Food sage Thwampus had also drifted closer, his gaseous form swirling with unusual agitation. The food requires recuperation? Rick chuckled. Everything needs time to be its best, Thwampus. The meat fibers need time to relax, redistribute moisture, finish breaking down. Good barbecue can't be rushed. As the hours passed, more aliens found excuses to wander by the human section. The initial mockery had given way to confusion, then curiosity, and now something approaching fascination. The smoke was having an effect that none of them quite understood. Rick had learned something during his years competing on Earth that these aliens were about to discover the hard way, that the smell of properly smoked meat was humanity's secret weapon. It bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to some primal part of the brain that existed in every sentient species. You know, Rick said, adding another split of oak to his firebox, humans had to learn to cook during some pretty harsh times. Ice ages, resource scarcity, tough conditions. We learned to take the toughest cuts of meat and turn them into something special through patience and technique. The aliens were listening now, really listening, and Rick could see something changing in their expressions, or what passed for expressions in their various anatomies. By hour 12, the BBQ smoke had begun permeating the entire space station's ventilation system. What started as a localized phenomenon had become a station-wide olfactory event that was affecting alien behavior in unprecedented ways. Station productivity dropped to nearly zero as beings from across the galaxy found themselves inexplicably drawn to the human section. They claimed they were just passing through, or checking on diplomatic protocols, or investigating unusual atmospheric readings. But Rick knew better. They were following their noses. Chef Glorbnox had now taken up permanent residence near the smoker, his crystalline form chiming softly whenever the wind shifted and brought fresh waves of smoke his direction. He'd abandoned all pretense of superiority and was asking increasingly detailed questions about wood selection and temperature management. The aromatic compounds, he chimed, they're somehow bypassing my logical processing centers and creating direct neural responses. How is this possible? Jenny, who was basting ribs with a mixture that made the air shimmer with deliciousness, looked up from her work. It's affecting your limbic system, Glorbnox, the part of the brain that deals with emotion and memory, before rational thought gets involved. Taste Master Velix was having an even more dramatic reaction. His compound eyes had dilated to twice their normal size, and his 6 arms kept reaching toward the smoker before he'd catch himself and pull them back. His mandibles clicked in patterns that suggested his translator was struggling to convert his thoughts into coherent speech. This is unprecedented, he managed. My sensory apparatus is detecting flavor precursors at concentrations that should be impossible. The complexity is, it's... Yeah, Rick said, checking his brisket's internal temperature. It's pretty good. Food sage Thwampus was perhaps the most affected of all. His normally contained gaseous form was swirling in patterns that perfectly mimicked the smoke rising from Rick's chimney. His speakers crackled with static as he tried to form words. The philosophical implications, he wheezed, of this aromatic transcendence are making you hungry? Rick supplied helpfully. Station security had been called twice due to what they termed mass behavioral anomalies. Aliens were abandoning their posts to wander the corridors, following air currents like they contained some kind of mind-altering substance, which, Rick reflected, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The Zephyrian delegation had set up camp in the corridor outside the human quarters. The Crystalline Collective had reassigned their entire diplomatic team to cultural observation duties in Rick's vicinity. Even the normally aloof quantum consciousness beings had manifested physical forms just so they could experience smell. Jenny was documenting everything with scientific precision. The smoke contains over 100 distinct volatile organic compounds, she explained to anyone who would listen. Phenols from the wood, carbonyls from the Maillard reaction, organic acids from fat rendering. Each species' olfactory systems are responding differently, but But the universal response suggests that the appreciation for complex aromatic compounds might be a fundamental characteristic of sapient life. Rick just smiled and tended his fire. He'd seen this effect before, at competitions back on Earth. There was something about the smell of properly smoked meat that reached across species barriers and spoke to something universal. 24 hours, he announced to the gathered crowd of aliens, all of whom were now hanging on his every word. Then we eat. The official judging began exactly 24 hours after Rick had started his smoker. The alien dishes were presented first, receiving the usual polite applause from a gallery that seemed distracted and fidgety. Everyone kept glancing toward the human section, where Rick was making final preparations. When his turn came, Rick wheeled out a cart, loaded with enough barbecue to feed a small army. The brisket, sliced thick to show the perfect smoke ring, glistened with rendered fat. The ribs had a bark so perfect it looked like edible art. The pulled pork was piled high, steaming and aromatic. Alongside the meats were sides that Jenny had prepared with the same scientific precision: mac and cheese that achieved the perfect balance of cream and cheese, cornbread with a golden crust, and coleslaw that provided acidic contrast to the rich meats. The smell hit the judging panel like a tidal wave. Chef Glorbnox's crystalline form began resonating at a frequency that created harmonious chimes throughout the hall. He reached for the brisket with what might charitably be called reverence, lifted it to whatever passed for his mouth, and consumed it. What happened next could only be described as a religious experience. Glorbnox's entire crystalline structure began glowing from within, patterns of light racing through his faceted form, like neural pathways made visible. He made a sound that his translator couldn't process, something between a sigh and a song. He began, then stopped. I understand now. This isn't just food. This is the universe expressing itself through flavor. Taste Master Felix tried the ribs next. His compound eyes rolled back, and his 6 arms went limp as his mandibles worked silently. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. 37 distinct flavor compounds in the first bite alone. Layer upon layer of complexity, each element in perfect harmony with the others. The smoke penetration is complete. The texture contrast between bark and interior is. He paused, struggling with concepts his language apparently lacked words for. This is perfection. This is what food was meant to be. Food sage Thwampus approached the pulled pork with the solemnity of a religious ritual. His gaseous form swirled around the meat before somehow consuming it. The effect was immediate and dramatic. His containment suit began projecting colors that hadn't existed in the visible spectrum before. I have transcended, he announced in a voice filled with wonder. This is not mere sustenance. This is enlightenment served on a plate. The philosophical implications of this culinary achievement will reshape our understanding of consciousness itself. The other aliens in the gallery had pushed forward, desperate for their own taste. Rick calmly served everyone, watching as species after species experienced what he'd known all along. Properly prepared barbecue was more than food. It was transformation. Felix fell to his knees, all 6 arms raised toward the ceiling. I offer my homeworld's entire grain production for the recipe. Thwampus expanded to fill half the hall. Human Bronson. I propose marriage. Our species could create offspring capable of flavor achievements beyond current imagination. That's real flattering, Thwampus, Rick replied, but I'm going to have to pass on that particular offer. The judging was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, every judge awarded perfect scores. The vote wasn't even close. It wasn't even a competition anymore. Humanity had just conquered the galaxy through the power of properly smoked brisket. 3 months after what historians would later call the Great Flavor Awakening, Ambassador Rick Bronson found himself in the unusual position of being the most sought-after being in the galaxy. Every species wanted trade agreements with Earth, cultural exchanges, and most importantly, barbecue recipes. Rick had established Rick's Intergalactic BBQ Academy in the old diplomatic quarters, which had been hastily expanded to accommodate students from 47 different star systems. The waiting list was now longer than some species' entire lifespans. Jenny Martinez had been promoted to head of xenobiological taste enhancement research, a new field of science that she'd essentially created by accident. Her research into how different alien physiologies responded to Earth's spices and cooking methods was revolutionizing both gastronomy and biochemistry. The Zephyrians respond particularly well to applewood smoke, she explained to Rick during one of their daily planning sessions. Something about their respiratory chemistry makes them hypersensitive to the phenolic compounds. The crystalline collective, on the other hand, seems to resonate with hickory at specific frequencies. Rick nodded, adjusting his new title placard that read Galactic Pit Master General. It wasn't a position that had existed before, but the Galactic Council had created it specifically for him, along with a salary that could fund a small space fleet. The transformation hadn't been limited to diplomacy. Earth had become the unofficial culinary capital of the galaxy, with food tourism becoming humanity's largest export industry. Every major space station now featured at least one Earth-style barbecue joint, though none could replicate what Rick had achieved. The aliens had tried. Oh, how they'd tried. Chef Glordnox had attempted to create crystallized smoke essence that looked impressive but tasted like flavored air. Felix had developed compound flavor spherules that contained all the right chemical components but somehow missed the point entirely. Thwampus had created temporal meat aging chambers that could simulate 18 hours of smoking in 30 seconds. But the results were described by one human tester as like eating a chemistry set. You can't shortcut soul, Rick had explained to a classroom full of alien students who were learning to maintain proper fire temperatures. Barbecue isn't just about the chemicals, though Jenny here will tell you they're important. It's about patience, attention, and respect for the process. A Zephyrian student raised what might have been a tentacle. But Master Rick, surely there must be more efficient methods? Rick smiled, the same patient smile he'd been giving for decades. Son, if efficiency was the goal, we'd all be eating nutrient paste. Good barbecue takes time because good things take time. You can't rush flavor development any more than you can rush a sunset. The class nodded with the reverence typically reserved for religious instruction. Earth's rise to galactic prominence hadn't gone unnoticed by the other species. Humanity had gone from being considered barely civilized to being regarded as master artisans of the highest order, all because they'd learned to cook tough meat with patience and smoke. You know what the funny thing is? Rick said to Jenny as they watched their latest batch of alien students attempt to maintain consistent smoker temperatures. Back on Earth, barbecue was just barbecue. Good food, sure, but nothing revolutionary. Put it in space, and suddenly it's the most advanced cuisine in the galaxy. Jenny laughed, checking her notes on how quantum consciousness beings could experience taste without having physical forms. Maybe that's the real human advantage. We don't overcomplicate things. We just figured out how to make tough meat taste good, and apparently that was the key to galactic domination. Rick looked out the viewport at the stream of ships arriving daily, all carrying beings desperate to learn the secrets of Earth cuisine. Restaurants, culinary schools, spice traders, and food scientists from across the known universe had set up shop around every major human settlement. You know what I learned in all my years competing back home? Rick said, adding another split of oak to his teaching smoker. The best barbecue doesn't come from fancy equipment or secret ingredients. It comes from understanding that some things can't be rushed, and that the simplest methods are often the best. He turned to address his latest class of students, beings whose species had mastered faster than light travel, but couldn't figure out how to properly smoke a brisket. All right, everyone, today we're going to talk about the most important part of barbecue, patience. Because at the end of the day, the difference between good food and great food isn't technology or complexity. It's time, attention, and respect for the process. As his students leaned in to learn the ancient human art of low and slow cooking, Rick couldn't help but smile. Humanity had finally found something they were universally good at, and it had turned out to be the key to conquering the galaxy. Who would have thought that the path to galactic domination ran straight through a properly maintained smoker? The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for someone to show them what real food could taste like. They'd just never expected that someone to be a guy from Texas with a good dry rub recipe, and the patience to use it right.